Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing Daenerys 5, her final chapter of A Clash of Kings. And as many of you know, and many of you also probably feel this way, Daenerys is not the best POV in A Clash of Kings. She is, for me, so far, my lowest rated of the entire book. And it's kind of crazy because her last chapter that we get before the Battle of the Blackwater is possibly her best chapter. For some people, it's not my personal favorite, but I probably have it ranked number 2 with the House of the Undying. And there's so much that's great about that chapter for Daenerys as a character, about the visions and the prophecies she's being told that we still speculate on even to now. And then you go into Dany 5. And Dany 5 is supposed to serve as the conclusion of her arc. And in, say, book 1, it was perfectly done. My favorite chapter for Daenerys is her awakening of the dragons because it completely fulfills the arc that Daenerys has been on throughout that book. In this book, I feel almost the complete opposite, where I don't have Daenerys 5 ranked all that highly. It's probably in my bottom 10 of the book. And there are things to like, and I talk about this with every Daenerys chapter, but there's also a lot of things that I don't necessarily like. And so we'll go through that as we break down each and every page of this chapter. But overall, the idea has been that time has now passed. Daenerys' favor and people are viewing her as like a trophy that they can go see the dragons as this commodity. That time is over. Because of the actions of the House of the Undying, people are starting to really want her to leave, and she's starting to feel that. So let's start in page 656. Dany is eating a bowl of cold shrimp and persimmon soup when Irri brings her an ivory Qarthian gown adorned with seed pearls. Dany refuses the gown, saying the docks are no place. She decides to dress like a savage since the milkmen see her that way. It's in a lot of ways Daenerys returning to her roots. All these pleasantries that she's been wrapped into in Qarth, she's kind of forgotten herself in a lot of ways. She's kind of let the lies and the things that the Qarthian people do to Daenerys kind of get to her to some degree. And so this is kind of her returning to her roots, being a Khaleesi and being her own person. And a lot of that is what Daenerys' journey is about. It's about finding herself and about, especially with book 1 to book 2, challenging what she's now believed, the person that she is. And so here we're going to have a little bit of a reversion back to what we saw Dany in really her first chapter of this book. A curved dagger hangs from her medallion belt, and Jiqui braids her hair in the Dothraki style and fastens a silver bell to the end. Dany says she has won no victories, but Jiqui insists she's done a number of things. For one, she defeated the Undying. She also defeated Mirri Maz Duur in the last book. And so at this point, Jiqui is giving her a bell. Now, in the traditional sense, Daenerys hasn't won any large-scale battles, something that the Dothraki would more look at as being a victory, but at the same time, this is Daenerys' first victory. Now, for Daenerys, it feels kind of hollow, because to Daenerys, she doesn't feel like she did much. It was really that Drogon saved the day. He's the one that burned the Undying and allowed for her to escape. So she doesn't feel like it's necessarily her victory. And that's something we're going to see a lot with the Storm of Swords, is how Daenerys is able to outthink people, use their arrogance against them, and she will have her own victories. So here, the one thing I dislike a lot about this book, and especially this chapter, is how Daenerys doesn't feel like she has a lot of agency. None of the decisions or none of the conclusions that happen in this book are really related to Daenerys at all, which is very, in contrast to both book 1 and book 3. She accepts the bell, knowing the Dothraki will respect her more for it, and the bell chimes as she mounts her silver mare, and with every stride she rides. Neither Ser Jorah nor her blood riders comment on the bell. A lot of them are, I would say, looking at Daenerys and viewing her almost as a higher being, kind of how the Targaryens are viewed in general, but it's not because Daenerys is a Targaryen. We saw even in the first book, people didn't view her as a higher person because she's a Targaryen. It's now that she's escaped the Undying, she has awakened dragons, she's being viewed a lot higher than a normal person, especially by her Khalasar. And so something like having a bell braided into her hair seems very fitting, I would feel like, for people like Jorah and her blood riders. Dany chooses Ricardo to guard her people and dragons while she is gone, and Jogo and Aggo ride with her to the waterfront. They leave behind marble palaces and gardens and pass into the poorest part of the city. Modest brick houses face the street with blind walls. There are fewer horses, camels, and palanquins. I will point this out. It's interesting that George brings this up in this chapter, because when we've seen Daenerys talking about Qarth and the way she's described it, it's very much seemed like she's only saw the parts of Qarth that Zara wanted her to see. So the richest parts, the places that make Qarth look very splendid, not the poorer parts, maybe more of like the working class parts of Qarth that are not so kept up well and look beautiful. That's what Daenerys is seeing, and it reflects her journey kind of well, and the idea that like she's uncovering the lie that Qarth is, and that she's been used and all this other kind of stuff. I think that's a nice contrast to what Daenerys is finally starting to see because of the House of the Undying chapter. The streets are crowded with children, beggars, and the thin, sand-colored dogs. Pale men in dusty linen watch from doorways as she passes, and Dany senses they know who she is and do not love her. Very similar to what Tyrion experiences in King's Landing. The people do not care for him, same way that Daenerys is feeling now. She's feeling like she has to get out of this city, or else she may never escape at all. As we get into page 657. Ser Jorah would prefer Dany ride in her palanquin, hidden behind curtains, but she refuses. She, for one, wants to take more agency. She doesn't want to sit back. She wants to become, well, what she used to be, a Khaleesi and a leader. But also in another way, she wants to show herself to Qarth, that she's not afraid of them, that she is still a queen, a Khaleesi. But she also says she is tired of being carried and feels that riding gives her a sense of progress, that she's going somewhere, that she's progressing. She goes to the waterfront, not by choice, but because she is fleeing once again. Dany reflects that her entire life has been a constant flight. She recalls fleeing with Viserys in the night to escape the usurper's hired killers, and things like that. Daenerys has always been on the run, and the one thing that's consistent with Daenerys' character is she has a longing for safety, security, and a home. And so this is just all too familiar for her. And even though we know, like, Robert wasn't sending hired knives really after Viserys and Dany, but it's the threat of that being a possibility which caused them to move a lot. So yeah, it does have that reflection to Daenerys' past, which is a nice note. Like, and that's what I mean. There's a lot in this chapter to like in terms of reflection of Daenerys and her character. It's more that when this is a finishing chapter, conclusion to some journey Daenerys has to have in this book, that's where my issues lie. So a lot of this opening to this chapter, I do like. She then thinks how Xaro had warned her that Pyat Pri is gathering the surviving warlocks to work harm against her. Dany had joked at this at first, laughing, and reminding Xaro that he once dismissed warlocks as empty boasters. But Xaro admits he is no longer certain, citing strange omens in Qarth. All sorts of weird things are happening related to magic, or it seems like miracles. And it all comes down to what Quaithe had told Daenerys. Magic is awakening. And so all these things in the past that people weren't taking seriously, because of Daenerys and rebirthing the dragons, magic is at an all-time high in terms of power. And that's something even Xaro, who had been very pessimistic towards the warlocks, is now maybe starting to realize. Xaro says such strange times are bad for trade and suggests Dany leave Qarth soon. Here he reassures her and offers to leave with her, sharing brighter dreams than the visions she saw in the Palace of Dust. He once again proposes marriage and urges her to sail with him and to bear his child. And we know all of this is just trying to use Daenerys again. And Daenerys has realized this by this point, and she's not going to just sit here and give somebody else one of her dragons, which is one of the most rare things in the world. There is no value you can put on a dragon because of their value. And that's what Daenerys thinks of, but also, Daenerys views her dragons as her children. If she's never going to have children again because of what happened with Mirri Maz Dur, well, the dragons are going to be her legacy, more or less. Dany refuses to wed him, and Xaro grows cold and tells her to go. And you really see that Xaro has been using Daenerys the whole time. He never cared about Daenerys personally, and this is shown right here. He doesn't care about her well-being, and when it comes down to it, when Daenerys doesn't want to do what Xaro is proposing, he basically just shoos her off, let her find her own path. When Daenerys asks where she should go, he tells her to go somewhere far away. Dany considers that it may be time to finally leave, and building on this, her Khalasar has recovered from the Red Waste and are growing restless. They're now wanting to live how the Dothraki live. They don't live in cities. They don't settle down in places like this. They want to leave. Getting into page 658, Daenerys thinks she may have stayed in Qarth too long, seduced by its comforts and beauty, and she reflects that the city promises more than it ever gives. And that's the whole point. Daenerys has been trying to find help, to find aid for the entire book, and that's just not been present at all. She's gained really nothing outside of when she's made her own decisions and taken command of her life, going into the House of the Undying and finding some truths and some prophecies that may be useful in the future. She notes how her welcome had turned sour after the House of the Undying collapsed in smoke and flame. The Qartheen began to remember that dragons are dangerous. Gifts and favor vanished, replaced by calls for her expulsion and death. And that's the whole point of it is, at first, people are so enamored. Dragons are back. They haven't been seen in a long time. But now, once you have a demonstration of what dragons can do, these dragons were used to build empires and dynasties. They are extremely dangerous. One dragon is worth more than any army that you could possibly build. The Tourmaline Brotherhood openly demanded she be driven out, the ancient guild of Spicers called for her death, and only Xaro's influence kept the 13 from joining them. Dany knows it's only a matter of time before, somebody tries to assassinate her. She needs to leave. But at this, where does Daenerys go? She really doesn't have any support, so what can she do? She could go further east, fleeing even further from Westeros. She could try to go back to Westeros, but she doesn't have nearly the support, and that's the problem Daenerys is in. Ser Jorah, he wants to go further east, but at that point, what is really there for Daenerys in the east? Her blood riders would prefer to return to the Grass Sea, even crossing the Red Waste again, but Dany considers settling in Vaes Telloro until her dragons grow. So this was the place that she found in her first chapter where they had settled down. It had basically been their safety, and basically had saved all of their lives from the Red Waste, from things like starvation, dehydration. But what's really there? And you might be tempted on it because Daenerys is looking for a home. She's looking for safety and security, but she's also being pulled to the idea that, Daenerys' fate is not to rule over some random place, in the east in Essos. That's just not really her fate and her destiny. And Daenerys even knows this. None of those choices felt right to her. Even if she chooses a destination, she is unsure how she would get there. She doesn't have a ship. She really can't cross land all that well. She doesn't have the supplies, and so what does she do? And Daenerys knows her only real, ally, being Xaro, will not truly help her, and is playing his own game. He wants stuff from Daenerys, and that mainly is a dragon, because a lot of that is all Daenerys has worth-wise. Daenerys is not rich. She doesn't have a lot of fighters. She doesn't have a lot of value right now to try and barter with someone, is kind of the point I'm making outside of her dragon, something we'll see Daenerys actually use in the next book. But on the night he asked her to leave, she had begged for one last favor. Xaro isn't even really taking her seriously anymore, basically openly mocking her whether she wants an army, gold, or a galley. Dany asks for a ship, hating that she must beg. She feels like, Viserys must have. It's one of my favorite parts of Daenerys 3, even though I don't love that chapter. I do love how Daenerys starts to understand her brother a lot more because of her time in Qarth. Xaro is not about to do favors, but he does propose a trade instead of a gift. He offers 10 ships in exchange for one of her dragons. And Dany is not that desperate. Yes, she needs to get out of the city. Yes, she needs a ship, but she's not going to trade just her dragon for 10 ships. That would be a terrible trade. Dany follows this up by asking Xaro if he would have a mother sell one of her children, and Xaro replies that mothers sell their children every single day. It just tells you a lot about Qarth. Could you imagine that? But let's also take a step further. If you're somebody in poverty, you might be driven to extremes. Maybe you can't feed your child. Maybe the only way your child can survive is to be sold to somebody else that hopefully can feed them and clothe them or whatever. Xaro then increases the offer to 20 ships, then 100. But Dany refuses all of this. Xaro says he does not own 100, but offers 30 ships for one dragon. Dany then thinks about how, yes, 30 ships could land her in Westeros, but she doesn't have an army. If she had an army, maybe this would be more of a tempting offer. But again, that's the problem Daenerys runs into. Daenerys doesn't need a fleet because she doesn't have the men for a fleet. She needs something to just get her out of Qarth and get her to a destination where she can get an army, where she can get these other things. Dany then begins to ask Xaro, getting into page 659 as well, about how many ships Qarth has in general with all the different branches and the groups, and even asks how many are in like basically all of Essos, and she basically equates that to the value of a dragon. 1/3 of all the boats in the world, maybe that's worth a dragon. And I would go as far as saying even that might not be worth it. Like, yeah, you would be having a ton of riches because of trade you could control and your naval power, but a dragon's a dragon. You possess something that nobody else in the world has. Getting further into page 659, Xaro then weeps and accuses her of madness, blaming the warlocks and mocking her demand. Dany has not seen Xaro since that exchange. That was how they basically parted until we'll see them again in book 5. But it is interesting. A lot of people debate this, is Daenerys going mad? And there are little like things here where it's like, here, somebody calls her mad, but she's not really mad at all. Like, Daenerys is totally right to not want to sell her dragons, and especially for how Xaro's trying to lowball her. I do find it interesting. I've seen people like bring up this line in the past. I don't really think this is a line you should use for that theory. If you're going to use any chapter so far that we've covered for a theory like Daenerys will go mad, it's her last chapter in book 1, but I thought that was relevant to bring up. His seneschal brings increasingly cold messages ordering her to leave his house. Xaro's not even willing to speak with Daenerys anymore. He stops feeding her and her people and demands the return of his gifts. Dany is glad that she didn't marry. She sees how cold of a man he can be when, well, he doesn't get what he wants. She recalls the prophecy of 3 treasons for blood, gold, and love, and she believes Miri was the traitor for blood, but she doubts Pyat and Xaro are the other 2, since Pyat was not motivated by gold and Xaro never loved her. And I do believe Daenerys is right. I don't think this is any of her treasons yet. But again, I talked a lot about that in the last Dany chapter, so I'm not going to speculate it too much in this video. Go back to that one and that reread if you want to hear my thoughts on the House of the Undying. As they ride on, the streets grew emptier among stone warehouses. Aggo rides ahead, Jogo behind, and Ser Jorah stays at her side. Dany's bell rings softly as her thoughts return to the Palace of Dust. She recalls the titles given to her: Child of 3, Daughter of Death, Slayer of Lies, Bride of Fire. She reflects on the recurring theme of 3: fires, mounts, and treasons. And then she remembers that the dragon has 3 heads and asks Jorah what it means. So again, a lot of Daenerys' reflection on the House of the Undying, trying to uncover what all of this is going to mean. And this is where I think it's very fascinating, because you could very easily see someone become consumed with these prophecies, this much knowledge getting to them and being very paranoid. And even if you want to look at past Targaryens and how they've had dragon dreams or prophecies and how that has changed them. You think about Daeron the Drunken, which we see in the first novella, The Hedge Knight. We can tell that those dreams impact him. It's why he is, very drunk a lot of the times, to try and suppress those dreams. And so it's interesting to see as the series will develop if George does more with that having her paranoia and some of that be factored in because of what she saw in the House of the Undying. But Jorah notes that the dragon having 3 heads is a reference to the Targaryen sigil. Dany says there are no 3-headed dragons, though, which Jorah says the 3 heads were Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives in Visenya and Rhaenys. Dany recalls how she is descended from Rhaenys and Aegon's line through then Aenys and then also Jaehaerys. So a little bit of a history lesson, especially given Fire and Blood wasn't out at the time. Getting references like these, I believe for Aenys, this was his first reference. I'm not sure on Jaehaerys, but back in the day, this would have been huge little nuggets of information just building up the Targaryen lore for House Targaryen and Dany's family. As we get into page 660, Ser Jorah reminds Dany that Xaro said blued-lipped warlocks speak only lies and question why she cares what they whispered at all. Which is interesting given that we know Xaro is a liar as well. He never speaks the truth. And so you're in a nest of vipers. Who do you trust? And Dany is not sure what to trust. Should she believe in these visions? Should she take anything from them? She really struggles with that because Jorah also brings up the fact that the warlocks only wanted to drain her life, something she now knows. Daenerys doesn't know if she should trust them because they might have been manipulating her, all of this kind of stuff, drawing her in to then drain her life. She just doesn't know. Ser Jorah lists some of the visions and asks what they could mean, questioning the idea of a mummer's dragon. Very interesting that George brings this up here, because it's something we pull from a lot as to what we believe about young Griff. Dany explains a mummer's dragon is a cloth dragon on poles used in performances. And this is so interesting because she also says they're usually used to fight the heroes. And by all accounts, Daenerys is one of our big three and is especially a hero of this story. And so when you have that line, when we get someone later on in the story that we're told is a Targaryen in young Griff, being Aegon, the son of Elia and Rhaegar Targaryen, I very much believe that young Griff fulfills this part of the visions/prophecies that he is going to be this person that Daenerys eventually will get into a conflict with, and he is being paraded around like he's a Targaryen, when in reality he's a Blackfyre. Now, you could also say the Blackfyres technically are still Targaryens, given that Aegon legitimized all of his bastards, but the Blackfyres took on their own name, so the Blackfyres are still Targaryens, but not by name, more or less. Ser Jorah frowns at this, unsure of what to say, and Dany says she is certain the voice she heard was her brother Rhaegar, not Viserys, and recalls his silver-stringed harp. Ser Jorah admits that Prince Rhaegar had played such a harp and asks if she saw him. Dany then recalls what she had seen in her vision, that she described a woman with a baby at her breast whom Rhaegar called the prince that was promised and named Aegon. It's also very interesting that George brings this up here, because I think this is where he started to formulate, at least in terms of the text and giving us, the readers, some sort of foreshadowing to the future, is calling Aegon the prince that was promised, as well as the line before talking about a mummer's dragon. So I think that's really interesting to look at here, but it also tells you a lot about what Rhaegar was doing. He was trying to fulfill this prophecy of the prince that was promised. And the idea here that Rhaegar needed a third child. He was trying to fulfill that prophecy with Aegon, his other child in Rhaenys, his daughter, and then having, well, Visenya. Now, we know if Rhaegar had another child, they were not named Visenya because we haven't seen a Visenya pop up, but it's likely he had a third child in Jon. Dany then asks what the Song of Ice and Fire means, and Ser Jorah says he has never heard such a song, but that idea is introduced here and in the House of the Undying. Dany says she sought answers from the warlocks, but came away with more questions. As they ride on, the streets grow crowded again. Aggo calls for people to make way, while Jogo smells the sea and calls it poison water. The Dothraki distrust the sea and anything that moves upon it, as Dany resolves that they will learn to brave it as she once braved their sea with Khal Drogo. And Daenerys at this point has gained enough of their respect, and she has become, well, this all-powerful Khaleesi to them. With the things that she's done, they are going to be willing to go basically onto the ocean. Dany then notes the wine sinks, warehouses, gaming dens, brothels, and temples that line the waterfront. She sees a number of different individuals in the crowd, like thieves and money changers and spell sellers, and the waterfront is a vast marketplace where trade continues day and night. It's where most people get their wealth if you're living in Qarth, for someone specifically like Xaro. She thinks that goods can be bought cheaply if one does not ask where they came from. As we get into page 661, bent old women sell flavored waters and goat's milk from ceramic jugs strapped to their shoulders. Sailors from many nations wander the stalls, drinking spiced liquors and joking in unfamiliar tongues. The air smells of salt, frying fish, tar, honey, incense, oil, and sperm. Aggo buys honey-roasted mice from an urchin and eats them while riding, as Jogo purchases a handful of fat white cherry. And really the point of this is just to show this is the true life of Qarth. This is where you're having a number of sea captains bringing in imports, you're having trading being done. This is where most people can try and sell their wares. This is like the real center and hub for the common person of Qarth. They see a number of goods for sale, and they even see some fake dragon eggs. So there's a lot of foreshadowing in here to the possibility that young Griff in the future will be this fake Targaryen. I just want to point those out when I see them. Along the quays of the 13, chests of spice are unloaded from Xaro's ship, the Vermilion Kiss, and nearby, wine, sour leaf, and striped hides are loaded into the Bride in Azure. Farther on, a crowd gathers around the Spicer Galley Sunblaze to bid on newly arrived slaves from Astapor, also plotting the seeds for where Daenerys will go in the next book. Dany realizes she will receive no help from the 13, the Tourmaline Brotherhood, or the Ancient Guild of Spicers, as most of them either want her to leave or want her to be killed. She rides past their docks to the far end of the harbor where foreign ships are allowed to dock. She dismounts near a gaming pit where a basilisk is killing a red dog amid cheering sailors. Dany orders Aggo and Jogo to guard the horses while she and Ser Jorah speak with captains. She is comforted to hear Valyrian and the common tongue spoken again. Daenerys feels a lot more at home. She's away from a lot of the Qarthian people. She's with more traditional folk that she might be more comfortable with. These are sailors from all across the world. They could be from Pentos, they could be from Westeros, they could be from anywhere, right? They could be from Bravos. And so Daenerys just feels a lot more at home with people that are not from Qarth, because Qarth is not a great place. Sailors and dock workers make way for her, unsure what to think of her appearance and dress. And that's the thing, is you're seeing Daenerys, who already has a reputation in Qarth especially, and she's dressed like a Dothraki. It's not very traditional. It doesn't look very regal or queen-like. So many are going to question her and maybe even think that she's a beggar queen, just like her brother was in being a beggar king. Ser Jorah walks beside her in chainmail and a green surcoat bearing the Mormont sigil. Neither Dany's beauty nor Jorah's strength impress the captains as they approach. A captain laughs and walks away when told she needs passage for Dothraki, horses, herself, Ser Jorah, and 3 dragons. A Lyzini captain mocks her claim to be Daenerys Stormborn, Queen of the 7 Kingdoms. Right now, Daenerys is having no success with any of these captains. And can you imagine, for a second, if you're one of these captains, you're a trader, you've come to Qarth to trade whatever your goods are, and you just have somebody that comes up to you that looks like a Dothraki, lower class. Again, remember the stereotypes and the way people view the Dothraki. And they come up to you saying, can I have passage for myself and 100 Dothraki that she has? The reputation here is not great. A lot of people will be thinking, what's going to stop these Dothraki coming onto my ship and just murdering everybody? Because that's what the Dothraki do. They are a conquering people. And that's why so many people have a bias against them, which I don't necessarily blame them because of the way that their culture is built on violence. And so that's the issue you run into if you're Daenerys. And then other people are just not going to believe that she's the person she's saying she is because she doesn't look anything like a queen. As we get into page 662, the cargo master of the Mirish galley, Silken Spirit, says dragons are too dangerous at sea, and the owner of Lord Pharaoh's belly would carry dragons but refuse to take the Dothraki. So each one of these captains seem to just have some excuse as to not take Daenerys, and they are valid excuses. I mean, I would also be a little spooked to have dragons on my ship. Okay, if they breathe a little bit of fire, it could put the whole ship ablaze, and then you're kind of screwed. So, as much as we're on Daenerys' side reading this chapter, I also do like to get into the heads of other characters and understand why they would do certain things. I kind of understand a lot of these captains. We then see the captains of Quicksilver and Greyhound treat Daenerys politely and share wine, raising her hopes, thinking there's a chance. But then their asking price is just far beyond what Daenerys can afford. Daenerys is not very rich, and that's the other issue you run into. But another nice note is we know one of the Targaryen dragons is actually named Quicksilver. So a nice little note to that as well. There's a lot of little sly notes to what George will later write in Fire and Blood. So I do like to throw that in there when I get the chance. Other ships are dismissed for being too small, bound elsewhere, or unseaworthy. As they move on, Ser Jorah warns Dany that they are being followed and tells her to not turn. He steers her towards a brass seller's booth and loudly pretends to admire the wares. Using the reflection, Dany sees 2 men behind them, one fat and brown-skinned, the other older with a staff. And we're going to find out that this is Strong Belwas and Barristan, but at the time of reading this for the first time, is this an assassination plot by one of the factions in Qarth? What is going on here? And this is very clever what Dany and Jorah do. Use like a mirror, more or less, to kind of see who's behind you without having to make it obvious you're trying to figure out who's behind you. It's very clever, and George does this in a really interesting way. Ser Jorah confirms both men have been following them since leaving Quicksilver. The brass seller praises his platter and offers it to her for 30 honors. Dany claims the seller's trying to rob her and calls out about her guards. Quietly, she tells Jorah the men following may mean no harm. Maybe they're just trying to see Daenerys, this queen that they've been told, or maybe they want to know where the dragons are to see them. Maybe. And this is Daenerys thinking more positively, but usually that's not what has been the case lately for Daenerys. The brass seller tries to lower the price to 20 honors, but Dany studies the reflection, noting the older man looks Westerosi and the other is very large. She considers whether they might be bounty hunters or warlock creations, but the seller drops the price to 10 honors and tries to flatter her. This seller, by the way, is putting in a shift. He's trying his best. Daenerys is playing it perfectly, not acting interested until he goes to a price that's just so low that you're just like, I'll take it, why not? Dany then insults the platter and shoves it back at him, calling the seller witless, as we get into page 663. The brass merchant lowers his price to 8 honors, pleading dramatically, and Dany dismisses the platter, noting she eats from gold plates at Xaro's table. As she turns away, she studies the two strangers following her. The brown man is extremely large, bald, smooth-cheeked like a eunuch, and armed with a curving arak. He wears yellow silk at his waist and a tiny iron-studded vest, his scarred body mostly bare. Strong Belwas comes off as a very intimidating figure. He's very built, not in terms of straight up muscle, but in terms of he's just a big dude. And when you see all these scars, you're like, okay, this is a guy that's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. So right away you're thinking, if you're Daenerys, if it comes down to it, is Jorah going to be able to take Strong Belwas? And you also do have two of her blood riders nearby, but not as close. If they were both to approach Daenerys, if they overwhelm him quick enough, Daenerys might be dead here. That's what I'd be thinking if I was Daenerys. But the other man, she notes, wears an undyed wool cloak with long white hair and beard, leaning on a tall hardwood staff. Dany thinks their open staring argues against hostile intent, but decides caution is wise. She notes to Ser Jorah that the old man carries no sword. And this is what I would be thinking as well. This really reminds me of, if you've watched Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, when Gandalf is going to Edoras. He's going to try and awaken Theoden from his spell that he's under with Saruman. And when the Rohan guards are like, we need your staff as well, Gandalf plays up the idea that he's just some old man. He needs his walking staff. That's exactly what I think of here with Barristan kind of walking behind. He's playing that role of, I'm not all that competent. You don't got to worry about me too much, until you do. The brass merchant continues after them, lowering the price to 5 honors, but Ser Jorah remarks that a hardwood staff can be as deadly as a mace. The merchant drops the price again, dancing backward and thrusting the platter toward them. He wants to get rid of this at all costs. He is doing a terrible job of negotiating, but you can tell he's kind of desperate. Ser Jorah confirms the old man is lingering nearby while the brown man watches Dany closely. Barristan is a bit more subtle. Strong Belwas, this is definitely not his territory of expertise. The merchant begs for 2 honors, nearly exhausting himself, and Dany tells Ser Jorah to pay him before he hurts himself. She resolves not to be toyed with by the two strangers, but before she can confront them, a Qarthian man steps into her path and kneels, offering her a jeweled box. And Dany doesn't even really think about it. She has been getting gifts like this the entire book, and she's kind of at this point desperate for anything that can help pay for travel. So at this point, Dany accepts it reflexively and opens it. Inside, at first, she sees a green scarab carved of onyx and emerald. She thinks it's beautiful and believes it could help pay for passage. But as she reaches into the box, the man apologizes, though she scarcely hears him. This is a sorrowful, assassin that we had foreshadowed earlier on in the book that I had kind of brought a little bit of attention to for this exact moment. Because Dany is mere moments away from dying. As we get into page 664. The scarab unfolds with a hiss, revealing a black, almost human face and a venom-dripping tail. The box is knocked from Dany's hand, shattering as it flies away. Pain shoots through her fingers as she cries out and drops to one knee. Dany, and especially as you're reading it, you as the reader, you're kind of confused as to what just happened. Did Daenerys get stung? What just happened? And it all happens so very quickly. The brash merchant shrieks, a woman screams, and the crowd erupts in shouting and panic. Ser Jorah rushes past her as chaos breaks out around them. The old man slams the butt of his staff into the ground. Aggo rides to a stall and leaps from his horse as Jogo's whip cracks overhead. Ser Jorah, thinking Strong Belwas is going to attack, strikes him with a brass platter. Sailors, merchants, and whores flee or shout amidst the confusion. The old man kneels and says, the creature is dead, asking if Dany's hand is broken. Dany tests her fingers and she says she does not think so. And what has just happened is Barristan's reaction is so great. He's so skilled, which would be a huge red flag for Daenerys. is that he's able to kill this manticore extremely quickly, saving Daenerys' life. As the old man begins to explain, Aggo and Jogo seize him. Aggo kicks away his staff, while Jogo forces him to his knees with a dagger at his throat. Jogo asks if Dany wants to see the color of the old man's blood. Dany orders them to release him and tells them to look at the blood on the end of his staff, where they find out that Barristan, well, at the time, Arstan, they believe, has killed the manticore and saved Dany's life. Ser Jorah has been knocked down by the eunuch and draws his sword as the eunuch draws his arak. Dany steps in between them and orders both to stop and lower their weapons. And this is one thing that's good to present Strong Belwas as being a capable fighter. If he can put up a fight against Ser Jorah, he's got to be pretty competent. Ser Jorah protests that the men attacked her, but Dany says they were defending her and identifies the attacker as the Qartheen, now gone. She explains the jewel box contained a manticore, and the old man knocked it away just in time. The brass merchant is still on the ground, and Dany helps him up. He says he was not stung, only touched when the creature landed on his arm. Dany gives him a silver coin and sends him away. She asks the old man his name, and he says he is called Arstan, and that Belwas named him Whitebeard on the voyage. He remains kneeling as Aggo retrieves his staff, and Aggo scrapes the remains of the manticore from the staff and hands it back to him. And this should be a lot of warning flags right away. Barristan, Daenerys has already picked up that he's Westerosi. He's instantly kneeling for her. He's talking in a language that would suggest maybe higher class. There's a lot here that should very much have a lot of curiosity from Dany as we get into page 665. Dany asks who Belwas is, and the huge brown eunuch introduces himself as Strong Belwas, famed in the fighting pits of Meereen. He boasts that he never lost a fight and shows his scarred belly. Belwas says he allows each opponent to wound him once before killing him, which is an insane backstory. George was cooking when he did Strong Belwas's background. Like, Strong Belwas could have easily have just been some no-name guy that's just a pit fighter with nothing remarkable about him. Not only does Strong Belwas have an extremely unique look to him, he also has an extremely unique background, which I love. Dany asks why he is in Qarth, and Belwas explains he was sold from Meereen through Kor and Pentos to a fat man with sweet-smelling hair. Dany identifies the man as Illyrio. So Illyrio has come to help Daenerys, as he's now been informed that she's escaped the Dothraki Sea, and that now that she has dragons. Belwas confirms he and Whitebeard were sent by Magister Illyrio. Arstan Whitebeard apologizes for alarming her and explains Illyrio could not travel himself. Arstan switches to the common tongue and admits they expected someone a bit more regal. And so that kind of pays off. Daenerys dressing Dothraki, in a lot of ways, could have led to her death because Barristan and Strong Belwas were not there to protect her from this assassination, but they were able to just in time. Dany laughs and notes her lack of queenly appearance, and she observes that Arstan speaks the common tongue well and asks if he's from Westeros. So Dany has picked up on this quite quickly. He has to be from Westeros. He has the look, he has the speech. The question is, who is he? And he speaks the common tongue quite well, so it would suggest a background of at least being somewhat middle to higher class. Arstan says he was born in the Dornish marches and once squired for a knight of House Swan. He says he now serves as squire to Belwas. But this also should ring a lot of alarm bells. Arstan is this skilled with this staff, and he has such a good reaction time, and he's now just showing up to serve Daenerys, and he's a squire at his older age to Strong Belwas, who was a pit fighter. There's a lot of things here that just don't add up. And I especially think that if you're reading for this for the first time, now, I didn't have this experience given I watched the show up to a certain point before reading the book, so this reveal, like, I knew who this was as soon as he got introduced. But if you were a book reader only, this would have been like, who is this guy? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Ser Jorah then remarks that Arstan seems old for a squire, and Arstan replies that he is not too old to serve his liege. Arstan says he had seen Ser Jorah fight at Lannisport and Pike, and Ser Jorah does not recall him and says he is no longer a lord, only a knight. And that's the thing, Jorah hasn't seen Barristan for years at this point, so you can obviously tell he wouldn't recognize him because of his appearance has changed quite a lot in that time. Dany calls her Jorah a knight of her Kingsguard and her trusted friend and counselor. She welcomes Arstan, Whitebeard, and Strong Belwas into her service, and she introduces Ser Jorah, Aggo, and Jogo, calling the latter two blood of her blood and witnesses to her dragon's birth. And we get into the last page for Dany in this book, page 666. Belwas mocks Aggo and Jogo as horse boys, boasting that he has killed many in the fighting pits. Aggo does not react very kindly to this and draws Arak and threatens Belwas, but Dany orders against this, just have the peace, and she reprimands Belwas to a degree in terms of you're going to have to get along with them, treat them with respect. And it's also interesting because Belwas is like kind of shocked by this. Not many people can actually rebuke him or have the courage to do so. And so in a lot of ways, Dany is probably actually gaining his respect given the fact that Daenerys is like a third of his size. Dany does soften the rebuke though with a smile and asks what Magister Illyrio wants of her. Belwas bluntly says Illyrio wants her and her dragons. And this is the exact same thing that we're seeing for someone like Xaro. He wants her and her dragons. It's not exactly that he cares about her, but he wants what she might have in the dragons. Arstan explains they were sent to find her and bring her back to Pentos. He says Robert the Usurper is dead and the Seven Kingdoms are bleeding. He reports that when they left Pentos, 4 kings were contending for power and justice was gone. Dany feels joy but hides it and notes she has 3 dragons and a large khalasar. She doesn't have that large of a khalasar. She has like 100 people. Not all of them are warriors. She has no army. And that's the point here, is like, it's nice and all to suggest that Dany could possibly go back to Westeros and maybe she would be the best ruler, but she has no army. She has no support. She has nothing. Belwas says they will take everyone and that Illyrio has hired 3 ships. Arstan confirms the ships are waiting in the harbor, and Dany reflects on the dragon having 3 heads. She says she will tell her people to prepare to depart immediately, and Dany says the ships must bear different names. Arstan agrees and asks what names she wants. And very nicely, she names them after the dragons of Aegon and his sister wives in Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion, and she orders the names painted in large golden letters so all will know the dragons have returned. And that's the end of Daenerys in A Clash of Kings. So let's talk about why did I say in the open that I don't really love this chapter and I don't love her storyline overall. And for the most part, my biggest issue with Daenerys is she's lacking a real character arc in this book. And you can say she's overcoming people that are trying to use her, or people that are distrustful, or the pleasantries of Qarth. That's kind of the storyline. She's supposed to become the slayer of lies, all that kind of stuff. The problem with it is it's kind of repeating some of the themes of the first book. The first book was kind of about her trusting Miri and how that went so wrong. And that leads to basically everything going wrong with Khal Drogo and her position, but then she gets the dragons because she overcomes and she accepts herself as a Targaryen and the dreams that she's having. Book 2 doesn't have a very clear arc for her at all. And it's so weird because Book 1 and Book 3 have such clear arcs for her. Book 2 feels just very out of place. And when you also think about Daenerys in Book 1 and Book 3, Daenerys is a very active POV. She's actively progressing as a character. She's actively progressing the plot. In Book 2, she's very passive. She doesn't do a whole lot. The first chapter, it's, I would say, one of her better chapters of the book, but she is wandering around. It's a recap of what happened in Book 1. It's her trying to struggle with being a leader of the khalasar. And then Daenerys 2 and 3, not a lot happens. She doesn't do a whole lot. She's begging people to try and help her, and it's not working. Her 4th chapter is fantastic, of course. And then her 5th chapter is just, she's handed things. She does nothing in this book that progresses her plot or her character all that much outside of the House of the Undying chapter. So for instance, what is the ending of this book? Barristan saves the day because she's almost assassinated. And then Illyrio hands her 3 ships to get her out of Qarth. It's nothing that Daenerys did in this book that gets her out of the situation that she's in. And it's why Book 3 is so much better than her in Book 2. Because in Book 3, she's actively making decisions that help her gain an army, or help her win this victory, or she has to make a decision on should she stay in Meereen, should she leave. Daenerys is an active POV. And so when you have Daenerys, who is already a POV that's so isolated away from the main story in the first 3 books, when you have a passive POV, like Daenerys is for the most part in this book, she feels so disconnected. Like even the line at the end of this where she's informed that the kingdoms are in ruin and there's fighting between 4 different kings at the moment. It kind of rings hollow because like we just got done with the climax of the book with the Battle of the Blackwater. And then you go to Daenerys, who just feels so irrelevant to this story. Like if you completely took out Daenerys from this book, like there would be no difference. Like you wouldn't come away any differently is kind of what I'm saying. And that's why Daenerys in this book feels like she's only there to just completely halt the pace of the book. And I'll talk about Bran and Jon as we get to their closing of their arcs as well, because they kind of fall into the same thing as Daenerys, where they feel very isolated from the story that's being told. But for both of those two, there are fundamental reasons why they're there. And Daenerys, that doesn't say she doesn't have good things about her storyline and that she doesn't have a reason for being there, especially the House of the Undying chapter. But it just feels like on a reread specifically, Daenerys chapters, you can completely skip them and you don't miss the essence of this book. She is not intertwined in what's happening in Westeros at all. Whereas like, go back to book 1. Daenerys is a core foundational piece of that book. You know, what's happening with Daenerys is impacting Robert and Ned at King's Landing. You know, we have a whole big thing that drives some of this plot is Robert and Ned's kind of feud or argument about whether they should kill Daenerys at all. And that has a nice conclusion for when Robert dies as well. He tries to say, cancel the assassination on Daenerys. And then we see that happen in Daenerys' chapter where she's almost assassinated. So that's the difference between book 1 and book 2. Daenerys, for one, has a very strong characterization in that book. She also feels very connected, even though she's on a completely different continent to the main story that's being told. And also a lot of her themes are very similar to what's going on in the other point of views. And so in that regard, like I had Daenerys as, it's tough to pick one, but like she's right there with Ned for my favorite POV of that book. So I don't hate Daenerys. I love her in book 1. She was by far my favorite POV to do a reread on every single, week that I saw that I got to do her chapters. So it doesn't come from a place of I hate Daenerys. It just comes from a place of Daenerys in the second book is so like just completely different than her in book 1 in terms of what we're getting from her, that it doesn't work for me in this book all that well. And I think of the first 3 books, Daenerys and A Clash of Kings, in terms of a single POV for a book, is probably the worst. I think she's, the least for the first 2 books that I've done my reread on, is probably the worst. So yeah, and it's kind of reflected in my rankings. I believe I have 3 of her 5 chapters in my bottom 5 or 10 of the book. And so yeah, kind of a somber note to end Daenerys' storyline in this book, but that's just how I feel about her as a character in this one. So let me know what you guys think about Daenerys 5, A Clash of Kings. What do you think about her as a POV in this book? And I will see you guys all in the next one as we wind down A Clash of Kings. Bye, guys.